The moment my son opened his front door, I knew something was killing him from the inside. 15 pounds gone, hands trembling like a man twice his age, eyes that couldn't meet mine for more than a second. I'd spent 35 years investigating corrupt cops in Chicago. I knew what a man looked like when someone had him under complete control. I just never expected that someone to be his wife. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all started. 3 days before that door opened. 3 days before I saw my son disappearing behind his own face. 3 days before I made a phone call that would unravel 15 years of hatred, expose a dead man's innocence, and force me to confront the worst mistake of my career. Welcome to this story. I'm glad you're here. It was a Wednesday afternoon in early October when Vanessa called. I was sitting at my kitchen table in Lincoln Park, the same table where Diane and I used to share morning coffee before she got sick. The same table where I now ate alone, read alone, existed alone in a silence that had become so familiar it almost felt like company. 3 years of retirement had not been kind to me. 35 years as head of internal affairs for the Chicago Police Department had given me purpose, structure, enemies, and respect. Retirement gave me a pension and an empty apartment with too many photographs of people who weren't coming back. Diane passed in 2021. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and merciless. The way she would have wanted it if she'd had any say. She spent her last weeks worrying about Marcus and me, about the distance growing between us like a crack in winter concrete. Invisible at first, then splitting everything apart. I promised her I'd fix it. I just never figured out how. My phone rang with a number I recognized but hadn't seen in 7 months. Vanessa, my daughter-in-law. The woman my son had married 6 years ago in a ceremony I attended with a smile that felt slightly forced, though I could never explain exactly why. I should have let it ring. 64 years teaches you that unexpected calls after long silences rarely bring good news. But the apartment was quiet, and I was tired of quiet. James. Her voice came through warm and careful, the way witnesses sound when they've rehearsed their opening statement. I know it's been a while. I know things have been difficult between you and Marcus, but I think it's time we fix that. Don't you? I leaned back in my chair, studying the photograph on my refrigerator. Marcus at 22, graduating from Northwestern with his accounting degree. Grinning, proud, his arm around my shoulder like I was the center of his world. That was 13 years ago. Before Vanessa. Before the arguments I couldn't quite explain. Before 7 months of silence that started with a fight about money and ended with my son refusing to return my calls. How is he? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. 35 years of interrogation teaches you to let others fill the silence. He misses you, even if he won't say it. Vanessa's voice carried just the right amount of emotion, practiced warmth, calculated vulnerability. You know how proud he is. He gets that from you. She wasn't wrong. Marcus had inherited my stubbornness along with Diane's gentle heart, a combination that made him easy to love and impossible to reach when he shut down. I'd like you to come for dinner this Saturday. Our new place. 7 o'clock. I'm making that braised short rib recipe Diane taught me. Diane never taught her that recipe. I'd taught Diane that recipe, and she'd taken it to her grave without sharing it with anyone except our neighbor, Patricia. But I didn't correct Vanessa. Internal affairs investigators learn early that people reveal themselves most clearly in the lies they think are too small to matter. I don't know, Vanessa. Maybe it's too soon. James. Her voice dropped, lost some of its sweetness. Marcus is your only son. Diane would have wanted this. You know she would. There it was. Diane's name deployed like a precision weapon, aimed directly at the guilt I carried every single day for breaking my promise to a dying woman. Vanessa knew exactly where to strike. She always had. Something in my chest tightened. Not my heart. Something deeper. That instinct I'd spent 3.5 decades sharpening in basement interrogation rooms and internal affairs tribunals. The one that whispered when something wasn't right. When a story had too many perfect edges and not enough rough truth. But she was offering what I wanted. What I'd spent 7 months aching for. My son. Okay, I said. Saturday. 7 o'clock. Wonderful. The warmth flooded back into her voice like someone had turned a dial. We're at the Gold Coast building on North State. Penthouse level. I'll text you the details. I hung up and set my phone on the table next to my cold coffee. Outside, October wind pushed dead leaves down the sidewalk. Lake Michigan would be turning gray by now, the way it always did when autumn tipped toward winter in this city. Gold Coast. Penthouse level. My son was a senior accountant at a mid-size firm. Good money, solid career. But not Gold Coast penthouse money. Not even close. I stood up and walked to the window, watching the city I'd spent my entire life serving. Chicago knew how to keep secrets. I'd spent 35 years pulling them into the light, and right now every instinct I had was telling me that whatever was waiting for me in that penthouse on Saturday night was not a family dinner. It was something else entirely. 3 days. I had 3 days before I walked through that door and saw what my son had become. 3 days before I discovered a truth so devastating it would force me to choose between protecting my child and exposing a crime that reached back 15 years into my own past. Back to a decision I made in a basement office that destroyed a family I never knew existed. And back to a woman who had spent every single day since then planning exactly this moment. I told myself I wasn't investigating. That's what I said Thursday morning when I woke before 5, pulled on my running shoes, and drove across town to North State Street instead of jogging my usual route along the lakefront. I was just driving, just looking. Just an old man with too much time and not enough trust. The Gold Coast building rose 42 stories into the October sky, glass and steel catching the first pink light of dawn. The lobby alone probably cost more than my annual pension. A doorman in a pressed uniform stood behind polished brass, and through the floor-to-ceiling windows I could see Italian marble flooring and fresh flowers that screamed money louder than any bank statement. I parked across the street and did what 35 years of internal affairs had wired into my nervous system. I calculated. Penthouse units in Gold Coast buildings along North State ran $2.4 million minimum. I knew because I'd investigated a captain who'd been taking payoffs from a developer in this exact neighborhood back in 2015. The monthly carrying costs alone, mortgage, assessments, taxes, would eat through $20,000 a month without breaking a sweat. Marcus was a senior accountant at Whitmore and Associates. Good firm. Respectable. I'd checked their website obsessively during the 7 months of silence. Senior accountants at mid-sized Chicago firms pulled maybe $140,000 a year. Solid money for most people. But not this. Not even in the same universe as this. A black Porsche Cayenne sat in the building's private parking area. New. Probably $90,000 at minimum. The penthouse renovation Vanessa had mentioned in passing during her call, just a few updates we made to the kitchen. That alone would run $200,000 in a building like this. I pulled out a small notebook. Old habit. Internal affairs investigators don't use phones for notes because phones get subpoenaed. Notebooks get lost. I wrote down numbers the way I used to when tracking dirty money through union funds and evidence rooms. Income. $140,000. Estimated annual expenses. $480,000. Minimum. Gap. $340,000 per year. For 6 years of marriage, that meant over $2 million unaccounted for. Where was it coming from? I closed the notebook and drove to Roosevelt's Diner on West Madison. The same greasy spoon booth where I'd spent 1,000 mornings over 3 decades. The owner, a Greek man named Dimitri, stopped asking about my order 15 years ago. Black coffee, 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast. Every single morning like clockwork. Ray Hicks was already there when I arrived. 61 years old, built like the linebacker he'd been at University of Illinois 40 years ago. Now softened by retirement and his wife Maria's cooking. 23 years as a homicide detective, before he opened his private investigation firm. We'd worked dozens of cases together back when I was still hunting corrupt cops and he was still hunting killers. Now we just drank coffee and pretended the world didn't need us anymore. "You look like hell," Ray said without looking up from his newspaper. "And you're late, which means you drove somewhere you shouldn't have before coming here." Gold Coast. North State. He set the paper down. His eyes, still sharp enough to read a crime scene from 30 feet, studied me with that patient intensity that made witnesses confess and suspects crumble. Marcus's new place. Penthouse. 42nd floor. 2.4 million minimum. Ray whistled low. "On an accountant's salary." "That's what I said." He leaned back. Coffee cup balanced on his broad stomach. "So what are you thinking? Drugs? Gambling? Embezzlement? I don't know. That's what scares me." Ray nodded slowly. He understood. After decades in our line of work, the unknown was always more frightening than the confirmed. A known enemy you could fight. An unknown threat just ate at you from the inside. Trust your gut, James. It kept you alive 35 years in IA. There were cops who wanted you dead. Remember? Your instincts are the reason you're sitting here drinking bad coffee instead of buried in Oakwood Cemetery. He wasn't exaggerating. Internal affairs investigators in Chicago weren't popular. We were the ones who hunted our own. I'd received death threats, had my car vandalized, found a bullet in my mailbox once in 2008. The blue wall of silence didn't appreciate people like me poking holes in it. "There's something else," I said, stirring coffee I didn't intend to drink. "Vanessa called after 7 months of nothing, inviting me to dinner, sweet as honey, mentioned Diane like they were best friends." Ray's eyebrow rose. Diane didn't even like her. No, she didn't. Diane had never said it outright. That wasn't her way. But I'd watched my wife's smile tighten whenever Vanessa spoke. I'd noticed how Diane would go quiet after family dinners, staring out the window with an expression I could never quite read. Once, maybe 2 years before she passed, she said something I'd filed away and never examined until now. "That girl watches you, James. Not Marcus. You. Like she's studying you for a test you don't know you're taking." I dismissed it then. Diane was protective. Mothers-in-law always found flaws in the women who took their sons. But sitting in Roosevelt's diner with Ray, watching morning traffic crawl down Madison Street, that observation felt less like jealousy and more like prophecy. "You want me to run a background check?" Ray asked, already knowing my answer. "Not yet. Saturday first. Let me see what I'm walking into." He reached across the table and gripped my forearm. A rare gesture from a man who expressed affection through sarcasm and silence. "Call me when you get home Saturday. Or sooner if you need to." I nodded. Took a sip of coffee that had gone cold. "And James." He paused at the edge of the booth, pulling on his jacket. "Remember that cop you helped me with back in 11? Dawson? His daughter was about Marcus's age. Funny how things circle back." I frowned. "What made you think of that?" "Nothing." He shrugged. "Just the way the world works sometimes. Things you think are finished have a way of coming back around." He left a $5 bill on the table and walked out into the October morning. I sat there for a long time, watching the city wake up through the diner window, feeling that instinct pulse louder with every passing hour. 3 more days. Friday. Saturday. Then I'd know. But even then, even with all my training, all my decades of reading people and catching liars, I had no idea what was actually waiting for me in that penthouse. No idea that the answers I was looking for would destroy everything I believed about myself. And no idea that a man I'd buried in my memory 14 years ago was about to reach up from his grave and demand justice I never knew he was owed. Saturday evening. 6:45. The Gold Coast building rose against a slate October sky as I pulled into visitor parking. Every window on the upper floors glowed amber and warm, like a theater minutes before the curtain rises. I was the only audience member who'd been invited. The private elevator climbed 42 floors in silence. My reflection stared back from polished brass doors. 64 years old. Gray temples. Lines carved by decades of staring across tables at men who thought they were smarter than me. Tonight, that face just looked tired. The doors opened into a private foyer. Fresh flowers. Original artwork. The scent of something expensive cooking. The penthouse door opened before I could knock. Vanessa stood in the doorway, backlit and smiling. 33 years old, with the kind of polished beauty that required serious investment. Designer dress, hair in precise waves, a smile radiating warmth so intense it felt manufactured. "James, we're so happy you're here." She touched my arm. Light, brief, deliberate. I'd seen that gesture 1,000 times in interrogation rooms. People who used physical contact as a tool of control. The tour began, and with every room the numbers in my notebook screamed louder. The living room stretched 30 feet with floor-to-ceiling views of Lake Michigan. Italian leather furniture. Original artwork I recognized from auction catalogs. Each piece, 5 figures minimum. The kitchen featured a La Cornue range imported from France. Marble countertops with veining like frozen lightning. And a wine refrigerator stocked with bottles that belonged in a restaurant cellar. The renovation took 5 months, Vanessa narrated, fingers trailing along the marble island. Worth every penny. Every penny. $250,000 for the kitchen alone. Add the furnishings, the art, the Porsche downstairs. And we were looking at spending that shouldn't exist on an accountant's salary. Not in any legitimate universe. Then I saw Marcus. He appeared from the hallway, and my composure cracked. My son had always been lean and athletic. Now he looked hollowed out. Cheekbones too sharp. Collarbones visible above his shirt collar. 15 pounds gone at least. Dark circles shadowing eyes that refused to hold mine for more than a heartbeat. "Hey, Dad." His voice came out thin, filtered through something that stole its strength. We hugged for exactly 1 second before he pulled away. Stiff. Brief. A stranger's embrace. Dinner began. China that belonged in an estate sale. Crystal catching chandelier light. Vanessa served seared scallops, while surface-level conversation filled the space between us. Weather. Neighborhood. Neighborhood. Holidays. Words designed to avoid anything real. I watched Marcus the way I used to watch suspects who didn't know they were being observed. His hands trembled when he lifted his fork. His eyes tracked to Vanessa before every response, seeking permission. When she touched his shoulder to pass the bread, he flinched. Barely visible. But 35 years of reading body language made that flinch scream louder than a confession. That wasn't surprise. That was fear. "So Marcus," I said, keeping my tone conversational. "Work going well? Making partner track at Whitmore?" He looked up startled. "Oh, yeah. Fine. Busy. Fine." The word every investigator recognizes as a wall going up. This place is incredible. Business must be thriving. His jaw tightened. "We're doing fine, Dad. The renovation alone must have been a significant." His fork hit the plate hard enough to ring the crystal. "Why do you always do this?" "Do what?" "Interrogate me." He gestured at the space between us, face flushing with something closer to desperation than anger. "Judge me. Act like I'm one of your dirty cops across a table." "I'm not interrogating. I'm asking how." Vanessa's hand moved to Marcus's shoulder. Light touch. Almost tender. But his spine went rigid beneath it. His eyes lost focus for a moment. Like a man receiving instructions, only he could hear. "Sweetheart." Her voice was soft but lined with steel, the way a handler speaks to an asset about to break cover. "Let's not do this tonight." She turned to me, smile back in place. Seamless. "James, you look tense." "The study is down the hall. Very quiet." Why don't you take a moment to collect yourself? She was steering me somewhere specific. 35 years made you notice when someone directs your movement with precision. The question was why. I looked at Marcus. Head bowed. Shoulders hunched. Wife's hand resting on him like an anchor. Or a chain. Maybe I will, I said. Thank you, Vanessa. Take all the time you need. Her smile widened. I stood and walked toward the hallway. Behind me, Vanessa's voice dropped to a murmur. Marcus, responding in monosyllables. The soft clink of silverware. The study waited at the end of the hall. Door slightly open. Laptop lights spilling into the corridor like a whispered invitation nobody should accept. Every instinct screamed I was being led. That a woman who controlled every detail of this penthouse with surgical precision would not accidentally leave that door open. That whatever waited inside had been placed there for me to find. I walked through anyway. Because that's what investigators do. We walk through doors that should stay closed. Even when we know, especially when we know, that what waits on the other side will change everything we thought was true. The study smelled like leather and money. Mahogany desks centered beneath recessed lighting. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined with legal references and accounting texts. A Herman Miller chair that cost more than most people's first car. Everything arranged to project competence. Success. Control. But it was the desk that pulled me forward. Papers spread across the surface, not hidden in drawers, not locked in filing cabinets, just there, laid out like someone had been reviewing them and gotten interrupted. Or like someone had placed them exactly where they wanted a former internal affairs investigator to find them. I should have walked away. Should have gone to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, returned to finish a dinner already broken beyond repair. But 35 years of instinct don't shut off because you want them to. They fire whether you're ready or not. I moved to the desk. Told myself I was just glancing. The lie lasted 3 seconds. The first document was a wire transfer authorization. My eyes, trained to scan financial records the way a radiologist scans X-rays, caught the key details immediately. $470,000. Transferred from Whitmore and Associates client trust account to an entity called Lakeview Capital, LLC. Marcus's signature at the bottom. Clean. Confident. The same handwriting I'd watched develop from a child's scrawl into an adult's professional script. My hands moved without permission. Shuffling through the stack. Each page worse than the last. More transfers. Different amounts. Different dates. Spanning 18 months. Always to the same handful of companies. Lakeview Capital. Horizon Trust, Incorporated. Neither name appeared on any legitimate corporate registry I could recall from my years investigating financial crimes. Company letterhead from Whitmore and Associates. Authorizations bearing Marcus's signature. Invoices for consulting services from vendors. I would bet my pension didn't exist outside these documents. And beneath the pile, account statements from banks in the Cayman Islands. $1.8 million moved in careful increments over 18 months. Not small enough to avoid detection entirely, but structured just carefully enough to delay it. The work of someone who understood financial systems but wasn't quite expert enough to cover every track. The work of my son. I stood frozen, papers trembling in my hands, and felt something inside me fracture like a bone breaking under too much weight. This was Marcus. The boy who used to sit at our kitchen table doing math homework with a concentration that made Diane smile. The young man who graduated Northwestern with honors because he believed in precision and integrity and doing things right. How had I missed this? But even as grief rose in my throat, the investigator kept working, kept analyzing, kept looking for what didn't fit. Because something didn't fit. The signatures. I pulled 2 authorizations side by side and held them under the desk lamp. To any normal person, they would look identical. Marcus's handwriting. Marcus's name. But I had watched my son write his name for 35 years. I had signed his permission slips. Read his college essays. reviewed the birthday cards he sent Diane every single year without fail. And something was wrong. The pressure on the downstrokes was too uniform. When Marcus wrote, he pressed harder at the beginning of his name and lighter at the end. Natural variation. Subconscious rhythm. These signatures maintained identical pressure throughout. Mechanical. Controlled, like someone copying rather than writing. And the M. In Marcus. My son always crossed the middle peak, slightly higher than the outer strokes. A tiny quirk no one would notice unless they'd watched that letter take shape for 3.5 decades. In these documents, the peaks were perfectly even. Textbook. Too perfect. These were signed by someone whose hand was either shaking from something other than nerves, or by someone who wasn't Marcus at all. 30 seconds of paralysis. 30 seconds where I stood caught between being James the father and James the investigator, knowing I couldn't be both in this moment but unable to choose. Then my hands moved, trembling badly enough that I nearly dropped my phone pulling it from my pocket. I started photographing. Every document, every page, wire, transfers, invoices, account statements, signatures. The flash seemed too bright in the dim study. Each click of the camera, loud enough to wake the dead. My heart hammered against my bruised conscience. This was my son's home. These were documents that would either destroy him or save him, and I didn't yet know which. But I documented anyway, because that's what investigators do. We preserve evidence. We build the record. We let the truth reveal itself in its own time. 7 photographs. 8. 9. Each one a potential nail in my son's coffin or a key to his freedom. I couldn't tell which yet. Couldn't think clearly enough to separate what I was seeing from what I feared. Footsteps in the hallway. Soft. Deliberate. Coming closer. I shoved the phone into my pocket. Forced the documents back into something resembling the arrangement I'd found them in. Close enough. My heart pounded in my throat. Hands wouldn't stop shaking. The door swung open. Vanessa stood in the doorway, backlit by the hallway light. For one fraction of a second, so brief I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it, her perfect mask slipped, and beneath it I saw something that made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. Not surprise. Not even anger. Recognition. Cold. Calculated. The look of someone watching a plan unfold exactly as designed. Then the mask was back. Concern painted across her features with the skill of someone who'd practiced in mirrors until spontaneity became performance. James, what are you doing in Marcus's office? Her voice carried surprise she didn't feel. I noticed what was missing. No panic. No fear. Just a woman watching dominoes fall in the exact sequence she'd arranged them. I looked at her across that mahogany desk with 18 months of fraud spread between us. And in that moment, though I couldn't yet name why, I knew with absolute certainty that whatever I was holding in these photographs was not what it appeared to be. These documents, I said, keeping my voice level. We need to talk about these documents. Behind her, from somewhere downstairs, I heard Marcus's chair scrape against the floor. Footsteps rushing toward the stairs. Coming fast, and Vanessa smiled. Just slightly. Just enough for a man who'd spent 35 years catching liars to see the triumph hiding behind her teeth. Marcus burst through the doorway behind Vanessa, face flushed from running. His eyes found me standing at his desk, found the documents under my hands, and every drop of color drained from his face like water through a cracked vessel. Dad, what are you doing? The accusation in his voice hit harder than it should have. I was the one standing in a room full of evidence that pointed to a federal crime. But in his eyes, somehow, I was the intruder. Vanessa stepped aside to let Marcus pass, positioning herself slightly behind him. Her hand found his shoulder immediately, steadying him, or steering him. The choreography was seamless. These documents, I said, keeping my voice in the flat register I used during internal affairs tribunals. Wire transfers totaling $1.8 million through shell companies to offshore accounts, all bearing your signature over the past 18 months. Marcus reached for the papers. I didn't pull them away. Not yet. Let him see. Let him react, without coaching. His eyes scanned the top page. Confusion bled across his features. Genuine confusion, not the performed kind I'd witnessed in 1,000 guilty men. His brow furrowed. His lips moved slightly as he read. Then he looked up at me with an expression that was either the greatest acting I'd ever seen or the most sincere bewilderment. I don't. He shook his head slowly. Dad, I don't understand what these are. Your signature is on every page. I know what my signature looks like. But I didn't. He stopped. His hand went to his temple, pressed hard like he was trying to squeeze a thought into shape. I don't remember signing these. Vanessa moved. Smooth. Practiced. Her arms slid around Marcus's waist. A gesture of comfort that doubled as containment. This is obviously some kind of mistake, she said. Her voice carried exactly the right mixture of shock and denial. Marcus would never do something like this. Someone must have accessed his credentials at the firm. Identity theft is everywhere these days. She was good. Better than good. In 35 years of watching people lie, I'd rarely seen anyone construct a performance this flawless in real time. Every micro-expression calibrated. Every word chosen to redirect without overcommitting. But I'd seen her mask slip 60 seconds ago. And you can't unsee something like that. I looked at my son. Trembling. Confused. Pupils dilated despite the bright desk lamp. A fine sheen of sweat on his forehead that had nothing to do with running upstairs. These weren't the signs of a guilty man confronted with evidence. These were the signs of a man whose body was fighting something chemical. Something that didn't belong in his bloodstream. 35 years of internal affairs taught me one critical lesson. When the evidence seems too perfect, when it falls into your lap instead of requiring you to dig, when everything points in one direction with no loose threads, that's when you stop. Step back. Ask who benefits from you seeing exactly what you're seeing. I made my decision in that moment. And it was not the decision Vanessa expected. You're right, I said. My voice shifted. Warmer. Apologetic. I'm sorry, Marcus. I shouldn't have been in here. Old habits. You know how I am. Marcus blinked. Relief flooding his features so fast it confirmed everything I suspected. A guilty man doesn't feel relief when someone backs down. A guilty man feels suspicion. Marcus felt relief because he genuinely didn't understand what was happening. Vanessa's expression flickered. Something behind her eyes recalculated. This wasn't the reaction she'd planned for. Why don't we forget about this? I continued, moving toward the door. Passing Marcus, I let my hand rest on his shoulder. Squeezed gently, not to comfort him, though I hoped he felt that too, but to pull a single hair from his collar. A quick motion masked as paternal affection. I think I should head home, I said. Early morning tomorrow. Thank you both for dinner, James. Vanessa's voice carried an edge she couldn't quite hide. Are you sure you're all right? You seem upset. I'm fine. Just tired. Age catches up. I moved through the penthouse toward the front door. Collected my coat from the closet. And as I passed the dining table, I did one more thing that 35 years made automatic. Marcus's water glass sat half empty at his place setting. While pretending to adjust my coat, I palmed it, wrapped it in my handkerchief, and slid it into my coat pocket. DNA. Toxicology. Whatever was happening to my son, that glass would tell me. The elevator ride down was the longest 42 floors of my life. I stared at my reflection in the brass doors and watched a man make a decision that would either save his son or condemn him. The lobby, the parking area, my car. October air biting my lungs as I finally allowed myself to breathe. I sat behind the wheel for 60 seconds. Hands gripping leather. Processing. Then I pulled out my phone and made 2 calls that changed everything. Ray answered on the first ring, like he'd been waiting with the phone in his hand. "I need you," I said. "Tomorrow morning. Roosevelt's. Bring your forensics contacts." "What did you find?" "Evidence of embezzlement. 1.8 million through shell companies. Marcus's signature on everything. But Ray, the signatures are wrong. And my son doesn't remember signing anything." Silence. Then, "You think he's being framed?" "I think something worse than that. I think he's being controlled. Chemically. There are physical signs. Tremors, memory loss, dilated pupils. I have a hair sample and a water glass. I need toxicology run quietly. I'll make calls tonight." "What else?" "The second call. The one that mattered most. The one that would set everything into motion." I dialed the FBI Financial Crimes Hotline. Identified myself. Former head of internal affairs, Chicago Police Department. 35 years of service. The kind of credentials that make federal operators pay attention. "I need to report suspected corporate embezzlement," I said. $1.8 million through shell companies over 18 months. But I also need to flag potential signature fraud and possible criminal coercion of the account holder. This may not be what it appears on the surface. The operator transferred me. I gave details. Case numbers would be assigned. Agents dispatched. The machine of federal investigation would begin grinding forward. One phone call. That's all it took to put my son into the system. I hung up and sat in the dark parking garage beneath the Gold Coast building. Above me, 42 floors up, my son sat in a penthouse he couldn't afford, controlled by a woman whose smile held triumph, being slowly destroyed by something I couldn't yet name. I'd made the call, reported the crime. But unlike what Vanessa wanted, unlike what she'd planned for me to do in a blind rage of righteous accusation, I'd also flagged every inconsistency, questioned the evidence even as I reported it, left breadcrumbs for investigators to follow toward the truth, instead of just the convenient conclusion. It wasn't enough. I knew that. The system would still come for Marcus first. The evidence on its surface was damning, but I'd given him a fighting chance. And tomorrow, with Ray's help, I would begin building the case that would either prove my son's innocence or confirm my worst fears. Either way, the truth was coming. I just prayed Marcus could survive long enough to see it. 2 days. That's how long it took for my world to collapse into headlines. Monday morning, I made the mistake of turning my phone back on after 48 hours of silence. It exploded with notifications, missed calls, text messages, news alerts with my name in bold letters above photographs I didn't remember being taken. Former IA chief's son arrested in embezzlement scheme. Chicago's top cop hunter reports own child. For federal fraud, James Whitfield. Internal affairs legend. Turns in son over $1.8 million theft. The story wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about Marcus. It was about me, the father who called the authorities on his own flesh and blood. That's the narrative the media chose because that's the one that sells. FBI agents had arrived at Marcus's penthouse Sunday afternoon. I learned this through the news like everyone else. They'd secured documents from the study, questioned Marcus for 4 hours, placed him in federal custody pending investigation. Bail hearings scheduled for later in the week. My phone rang 43 times that Monday. I answered 6. Bill Carver, my former deputy at Internal Affairs, called first. "James, I heard what happened. You did the right thing. That's who you are." But his voice carried doubt beneath the encouragement. A question he was too polite to ask outright. "Did you really need to call it in yourself? Couldn't you have handled it differently?" Quietly, others were less diplomatic. Frank Novak, who'd run the organized crime division while I ran IA, left a voicemail I played once and deleted. "Your own son, James. I don't care what he did. There are lines. You don't cross family. Most people didn't call at all. Their silence spoke volumes. I could imagine the conversations happening without me, in break rooms and retirement dinners and golf courses across the city. Debates about whether I'd done the right thing, whether duty to the law excuses what I'd done to my child, whether a man who turns in his own blood can be trusted with anyone's secrets. My legacy, built over 35 years of public service, of hunting corruption and standing for accountability, was now reduced to a single headline: the father who arrested his own son. I sat at my kitchen table Tuesday evening, surrounded by the silence of my apartment and the glow of my laptop screen, and went through the photographs again. 9 images. Wire transfers. Account statements. Signature. Evidence so clear, so perfectly arranged, so impossibly convenient. And that was the problem. I'd built my entire career on one principle. When evidence is too clean, someone cleaned it. Real criminals are messy. Real fraud leaves ragged edges, missing pages, contradictions that require explanation. Real embezzlement over 18 months generates boxes of documents, not a tidy stack on an unlocked desk. I pulled out my notebook and wrote down everything that bothered me. The list grew longer with every line. Documents left in plain sight. Not hidden. Not locked. Just arranged on a desk in an office that Vanessa had pointed me toward after steering the conversation to create tension. An office she'd hurried past during the tour, closing the door quickly, then later suggesting I go there to collect myself. The door left slightly open, laptop light spilling into the hallway, after 7 months of complete silence. No contact. No explanation for the distance. Then suddenly, an invitation. A dinner. A tour designed to show me exactly how much money was being spent. Questions about finances practically scripted to provoke Marcus into an outburst that would give Vanessa the excuse to send me toward that study. Everything orchestrated. Every element positioned like chess pieces on a board I hadn't realized I was playing on. I wrote one sentence at the bottom of my notebook and underlined it 3 times. She wanted me to find those documents. She wanted me to make that call. The realization hit like a fist to the sternum. I'd been used. Manipulated. Guided through a sequence of events designed to produce exactly one outcome: me, the former head of internal affairs, discovering evidence and reporting it, giving it legitimacy, weight, the kind of credibility that an anonymous tip never could. My reputation wasn't collateral damage. It was the weapon. But why? That question spiraled through my mind in the dark kitchen as October rain streaked down the windows and Chicago hummed its nighttime frequency of sirens and distant traffic. If the documents were planted, if Marcus was being framed, then someone needed me specifically to trigger the investigation. Someone who understood that James Whitfield doesn't look the other way. That 35 years of IA meant I would report what I found regardless of who it hurt. Someone who'd studied me, knew my patterns, knew my principles, knew that if shown evidence of a crime, I would act. Someone close enough to arrange all of this. I stared at my phone, at Vanessa's number in my call history, at the 7-month gap of silence that preceded her invitation. And I thought about what Diane had said 2 years before she died. That girl watches you, James. Like she's studying you for a test you don't know you're taking. Studying me. For years. Learning exactly which buttons to push. Which principles to weaponize. Which doors to leave open knowing I would walk through them. I didn't sleep Tuesday night. Instead, I sat in the dark, notebook open, writing questions I couldn't yet answer. Who is Vanessa Whitfield? Really? Why does she need Marcus destroyed? Why does she need me to be the one who does it? What happened 7 months ago that made her decide now was the time? And underneath all of those, one question that scared me more than the rest combined. What is she doing to my son right now while he sits in a federal holding cell, confused and alone, still believing the woman who put him there loves him? Ray called at 11. Voice tight, with something between anger and determination. Toxicology contacts can run those samples by Thursday. Handwriting analysis by Friday if I push. But James, whatever we find, your son is sitting in a cell right now, thinking his father betrayed him. I know. So what's the plan? Find the truth. Prove Marcus is innocent. Figure out who Vanessa really is and why she's doing this. And if the evidence says Marcus actually did it, I was quiet for a long time. Rain tapped against my window like impatient fingers. Then I'll be the man who sent his own son to prison. And I'll deserve everything they're saying about me. But I won't be that man. I know what I saw in those signatures. I know what I saw in Marcus's eyes. And I know what I saw in Vanessa's face when she caught me in that study. My son is innocent. Someone is destroying him. And I'm going to find out who, even if the answer destroys me too. Cook County Federal Holding Facility smelled exactly how I remembered it from the other side. Disinfectant layered over desperation. Fluorescent lights buzzing at a frequency designed to make everyone beneath them look guilty. Metal chairs bolted to concrete floors. Glass partitions smudged with the fingerprints of 1,000 goodbyes. I'd sat in rooms like this hundreds of times over 35 years. Always on the investigator's side. Always with a badge and a purpose and the full weight of the law behind me. Never as a visitor. Never to see my own blood. Wednesday morning. 5 days since the dinner. 5 days since I'd watched my son being escorted from his penthouse in handcuffs while neighbors peered from doorways and Vanessa performed devastation for anyone close enough to watch. 5 days that felt like 5 years. The guard led me to booth 7. I sat, waited, stared at the empty chair on the other side of the glass, and tried to prepare myself for what I was about to see. Nothing could have prepared me. They brought Marcus in through a side door. Orange jumpsuit 2 sizes too large hanging off shoulders that seemed to have narrowed since Saturday. He moved with the careful slowness of a man navigating through fog. Each step deliberate. Uncertain, like he was calculating the distance to the chair rather than simply walking toward it. He sat, reached for the phone. And when his hand wrapped around the receiver, I saw it trembling so badly that the plastic rattled against the mounting bracket. Dad. One word. And everything in it. Betrayal. Fear. Confusion. A desperate plea from a man drowning in something he couldn't identify. I picked up my phone, pressed it against my ear, forced my voice into steadiness I didn't feel. Marcus. I'm here. He looked at me through the glass. Really looked. For the first time since I'd arrived at that dinner 5 days ago. And what I saw in his eyes made my chest constrict with something worse than grief. His pupils were dilated. Wide and dark despite the harsh fluorescent lights overhead that should have shrunk them to pinpoints. The tremors in his hands extended to his forearms. His lips were dry, cracked, and when he spoke, there was a slight slur to his words that wasn't there Saturday. Barely perceptible. But I'd spent decades noticing what others missed. This wasn't just stress. This wasn't the expected deterioration of a man in custody for 5 days. Something was wrong with my son on a chemical level. Something that predated his arrest. I didn't do this, Dad. His words came fast. Urgent. Like he'd been rehearsing them in his cell for 5 days straight. Those documents. I don't know half those company names. Lakeview Capital. Horizon Trust. I've never heard of them. I've never authorized transfers to any offshore account. I believe you, I said. And meant it with everything I had. Marcus blinked. Stunned. Like he'd expected me to argue. To interrogate. To be the IA chief across the table. Instead of his father. You do? I do. But Marcus, I need you to tell me something honestly. And I need you to think carefully before you answer. He nodded. Leaning forward. Hands still trembling against the phone. Your memory. Have you been having trouble remembering things? Days that feel blank? Conversations you can't recall? The change in his expression was immediate. confusion giving way to something deeper, something frightened. He pulled back slightly, then forward again, like a man trying to grasp a thought that kept dissolving when he reached for it. Yeah. He swallowed hard. Yeah, actually. For months. Maybe longer. There are days at work where I look at my calendar and there's nothing. Whole meetings I apparently attended that I have zero memory of. Vanessa says, I'm just overworked. Says I need more rest. That stress does this to people. His eyes searched mine through the glass. But that's not normal, is it? No, I said quietly. That's not normal. What else? Physical symptoms. Anything. I'm tired all the time. Like bone-deep exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. My hands started shaking about 6 months ago. Vanessa made me a doctor's appointment. But she went in with me and I don't remember what the doctor said exactly. She told me it was just anxiety. Prescribed rest. What about food? Drinks? Anything Vanessa prepares for you specifically? Marcus frowned. Searching. Every morning she makes me this green smoothie. Kale, spinach, protein powder. Says it's brain food for long work days. And at night, she gives me these vitamins. Big capsules. Says they help with energy and mood. How long? He shook his head slowly. I don't. Maybe a year? Longer? I can't remember when it started exactly. It's all just. He pressed his palm against his forehead. Why can't I remember, Dad? Why are there whole weeks that are just fog? I studied him through the glass, the way I'd studied 1,000 subjects over my career. The dilated pupils that shouldn't exist under this lighting. The persistent hand tremors. The slurred speech. Memory loss spanning months. Fatigue. Resistant to sleep. Cognitive decline in a 35-year-old man with no family history of neurological disease. I knew what I was looking at. Not from medical school. From a case in 2009. A woman slowly poisoning her husband with lithium dissolved in his morning protein shake. We'd caught her through internal affairs because her husband was a sergeant and his deteriorating performance had triggered a fitness for duty review. 6 months of lithium microdosing. Tremors. Memory gaps. Cognitive fog. Dilated pupils. All of it. Every single symptom Marcus was describing. Marcus. I leaned closer to the glass. My voice dropped. Listen to me carefully. When you get back to your cell, do not eat or drink anything Vanessa brings you during visitation. Nothing. Not water. Not snacks. Nothing she's touched. What? Why? Because I think someone has been making you sick. Deliberately. For a long time. And I think that same someone arranged those documents on your desk knowing I would find them. Marcus stared at me. The fog in his eyes battled with a clarity trying to break through, like a man underwater catching a glimpse of sunlight above the surface. You mean Vanessa? His voice was barely a whisper. I didn't answer. Didn't need to. She visits every day, he said slowly. Brings me tea in a thermos. Says the jail food isn't safe. That she's taking care of me. My blood went cold. She was still dosing him. Even here. Even with him in custody. Maintaining the chemical leash that kept him compliant. Confused. Unable to advocate for himself. Marcus. I pressed my hand against the glass. Do not drink that tea. Promise me. He stared at my hand. Then slowly raised his own to match it. Palm to palm with an inch of cold glass between us and an ocean of unanswered questions. I promise, Dad. The guard called time. 15 minutes. That's all the system allowed for a father to tell his son that his life was being dismantled by the woman who slept beside him every night. Marcus stood. They came for him. And as he turned away, he looked back one more time. Don't give up on me. Never, I said. Not ever. They led him through the door. Gone. Back to a cell where his wife would visit tomorrow with a thermos of tea, laced with poison and a smile that could fool the world. I hung up the phone. Sat there in that empty booth for a long time. The glass partition still warm where his hand had pressed against it. My phone buzzed. Ray, toxicology results came back early. You need to see this. Roosevelt's. 1 hour. I was already walking. Ray was waiting in the back corner at Roosevelt's. Not our usual booth. The one we use during active investigations when we didn't want anyone overhearing. Laptop open. Manila folder thick enough to suggest he hadn't slept. He didn't greet me. Just turned the laptop around and tapped the screen. Toxicology report. Hair sample analysis. Your son. I read. Lithium concentration consistent with chronic exposure over 12 to 18 months. Not therapeutic levels. Higher. Fluctuating. The kind of pattern from irregular dosing by someone without medical training. Someone adding it to food in estimated amounts rather than measured ones. Now this. Ray pulled a document from the folder. Dr. William Park. Forensic Document Examiner. Former Secret Service Question Documents Unit. 22 years testifying in federal court. Rushed it as a favor. I took the report. Read the summary. Then read it again. Because my eyes refused to accept it. The question signatures present numerous indicators of simulation rather than authentic execution. Pressure patterns demonstrate artificial uniformity. Baseline alignment deviates from known exemplars by 0.8 degrees consistently across all question documents. Hesitation artifacts at curve transitions indicate conscious reproduction rather than automated motor memory. Conclusion. The signatures were not produced by Marcus Whitfield. Forgeries, Ray said quietly. Every single one. Whoever did this practiced for months. Good enough to fool banks. Not good enough to fool a guy who spent 22 years catching presidential signature forgeries. I set the report down carefully. Like it might shatter. My son is innocent. 3 words carrying the weight of every hour Marcus had spent in that cell. Every headline. Every whispered judgment. Every moment I'd spent believing the evidence instead of believing my child. James. Ray's hand landed on my forearm. Stay with me. Someone put your son in jail. They used you as the delivery mechanism. Focus. Who had daily access to his signature for years? Who had access to his food every single day? His wife, I said. 6 years of marriage. 6 years watching Marcus sign documents at their kitchen table. Tax returns. Mortgage papers. Cards. 6 years studying pressure and rhythm until she could reproduce it. And the lithium. The green smoothie every morning. The vitamins every night. 12 to 18 months of poisoning until his memory crumbled and his hands shook and his mind became too foggy to question anything. But why? Ray leaned forward. Why would a woman spend 6 years married to a man just to frame him? 1.8 million is significant. But it doesn't justify this level of sophistication. This isn't greed. He was right. 6 years of marriage. Months of forging. Over a year of poisoning. The elaborate dinner designed for me to discover evidence at exactly the right moment. This wasn't about money. This was personal. And it wasn't aimed at Marcus. She needed me specifically, I said. James Whitfield, former IA chief. To discover evidence and report it. Give it credibility no anonymous tip could. She needed my reputation as her weapon. Ray's eyes narrowed. Why you? I don't know yet, but I felt it. Something hovering at the edge of my mind. Connected to the 7 months of silence. To the way Vanessa watched me for years. To what Diane noticed, and I ignored. There's something else. Ray pulled his laptop back and opened a new window. I ran a deep background check on Vanessa Whitfield yesterday. Professional grade. And Vanessa Whitfield didn't exist before 2019. The diner noise faded to nothing. What do you mean? Everything about her. Birth certificate. Social security. Employment history. Education. Either doesn't exist, or dates back only 6 years. Before that, she's a ghost. Someone built that identity from scratch. Professionally. Expensive work by someone who understands exactly how background checks operate. I stared at the void on his screen where a real woman's life should have been. So who is she really? Ray closed the laptop. His expression carried the weight I'd only seen during homicide cases. The ones where the answer was worse than the question. I don't know yet. Give me 48 hours. I nodded. The diner existed at a great distance. Dimitri refilling coffee somewhere. Morning rush flowing around us. My son was innocent. Being poisoned by a ghost. Framed by a phantom who didn't exist until she decided to destroy him. And beneath all of it, beneath the false identity and the forged documents and the lithium-laced smoothies, was a reason powerful enough to fuel 6 years of living a lie. That reason connected to me. I was certain now. This wasn't about Marcus. Was never about Marcus. It was about something James Whitfield did. Some case I worked. Some decision I made that reached across years and found me in this diner, staring at proof that my past had come alive to systematically dismantle everything I loved. I thought about Diane's words. That girl watches you, James. Like she's studying you for a test you don't know you're taking. Studying me. For 6 years. Learning my principles. My patterns. Which doors I'd walk through. Which buttons would make me act without thinking. She'd mapped my psychology with the patience of someone who had nothing left to lose and all the time in the world to take everything from me. 48 hours, I said. Then we end this. Ray gathered his files and left. I sat in that back booth. Cold coffee untouched. October rain streaking down the window. Somewhere across Chicago, my innocent son sat in a cell. His poisoner walked free. And whatever she was planning next, whatever endgame had taken 15 years to construct, it was still in motion. The clock was ticking. And I didn't know toward what. Ray was waiting in the back corner at Roosevelt's. Not our usual booth. The one we used during active investigations when we didn't want anyone overhearing. Laptop open. Manila folder thick enough to suggest he hadn't slept. He didn't greet me. Just turned the laptop around and tapped the screen. Toxicology report. Hair sample analysis. Your son. I read. Lithium concentration consistent with chronic exposure over 12 to 18 months. Not therapeutic levels. Higher. Fluctuating. The kind of pattern from irregular dosing by someone without medical training, someone adding it to food in estimated amounts rather than measured ones. Now this. Ray pulled a document from the folder. Dr. William Park. Forensic Document Examiner. Former Secret Service, questioned, Documents Unit. 22 years testifying in federal court. Rushed it as a favor. I took the report. Read the summary. Then read it again, because my eyes refused to accept it. The question's signatures present numerous indicators of simulation rather than authentic execution. Pressure patterns demonstrate artificial uniformity. Baseline alignment deviates from known exemplars by 0.8 degrees consistently across all question documents. Hesitation artifacts at curve transitions indicate conscious reproduction rather than automated motor memory. Conclusion. The signatures were not produced by Marcus Whitfield. Forgeries, Ray said quietly. Every single one. Whoever did this. Practiced for months. Good enough to fool banks. Not good enough to fool a guy who spent 22 years catching presidential signature forgeries. I set the report down carefully. Like it might shatter. My son is innocent. 3 words carrying the weight of every hour Marcus had spent in that cell. Every headline. Every whispered judgment. Every moment I'd spent believing the evidence instead of believing my child. James. Ray's hand landed on my forearm. Stay with me. Someone put your son in jail. They used you as the delivery mechanism. Focus. Who had daily access to his signature for years? Who had access to his food every single day? His wife, I said. 6 years of marriage. 6 years watching Marcus sign documents at their kitchen table. Tax returns, mortgage papers, cards. 6 years studying pressure and rhythm until she could reproduce it. And the lithium. The green smoothie. Every morning. The vitamins every night. 12 to 18 months of poisoning until his memory crumbled and his hands shook and his mind became too foggy to question anything. But why? Ray leaned forward. Why would a woman spend 6 years married to a man just to frame him? 1.8 million is significant, but it doesn't justify this level of sophistication. This isn't greed. He was right. 6 years of marriage. Months of forging. Over a year of poisoning. The elaborate dinner designed for me to discover evidence at exactly the right moment. This wasn't about money. This was personal. And it wasn't aimed at Marcus. She needed me specifically, I said. James Whitfield, former IA chief. To discover evidence and report it. Give it credibility no anonymous tip could. She needed my reputation as her weapon. Ray's eyes narrowed. Why you? I don't know yet, but I felt it. Something hovering at the edge of my mind. Connected to the 7 months of silence. To the way Vanessa watched me for years. To what Diane noticed and I ignored. There's something else. Ray pulled his laptop back and opened a new window. I ran a deep background check on Vanessa Whitfield yesterday. Professional grade. And Vanessa Whitfield didn't exist before 2019. The diner noise faded to nothing. What do you mean? Everything about her. Birth certificate, social security, employment, history, education. Either doesn't exist or dates back only 6 years. Before that, she's a ghost. Someone built that identity from scratch. Professionally. Expensive work by someone who understands exactly how background checks operate. I stared at the void on his screen where a real woman's life should have been. So who is she really? Ray closed the laptop. His expression carried the weight I'd only seen during homicide cases. The ones where the answer was worse than the question. I don't know yet. Give me 48 hours. I nodded. The diner existed at a great distance. Dimitri refilling coffee somewhere. Morning rush flowing around us. My son was innocent. Being poisoned by a ghost. Framed by a phantom who didn't exist until she decided to destroy him. And beneath all of it, beneath the false identity, and the forged documents, and the lithium-laced smoothies, was a reason powerful enough to fuel 6 years of living a lie. That reason connected to me. I was certain now. This wasn't about Marcus. Was never about Marcus. It was about something James Whitfield did. Some case I worked. Some decision I made that reached across years and found me in this diner. Staring at proof that my past had come alive to systematically dismantle everything I loved. I thought about Diane's words. That girl watches you, James. Like she's studying you for a test you don't know you're taking. Studying me. For 6 years. Learning my principles. My patterns. Which doors I'd walk through. Which buttons would make me act. Without thinking. She'd mapped my psychology with the patience of someone who had nothing left to lose and all the time in the world to take everything from me. 48 hours, I said. Then we end this. Ray gathered his files and left. I sat in that back booth. Cold coffee untouched. October rain streaking down the window. Somewhere across Chicago. My innocent son sat in a cell. His poisoner walked free. And whatever she was planning next, whatever endgame had taken 15 years to construct, it was still in motion. The clock was ticking. And I didn't know toward what. The parking garage beneath my building at 9:15 on a Monday night. Level 3. Fluorescent lights, flickering overhead in that arrhythmic pattern that maintenance never fixed. My footsteps echoing off concrete walls. The distant hum of Lakeshore Drive traffic filtering down from street level. Too quiet. That registered first. A garage in Lincoln Park on a Monday evening should have sounds, engines, doors, footsteps besides mine. But there was nothing. See me, the vial, the blanks, dot on. Just empty space and bad lighting, and the kind of silence that 35 years of working with dangerous people had taught me to fear. I reached for my phone. Old reflex. Call for backup before confirming the threat. I never got to dial. They came from behind concrete support pillars. Two men. Dark clothing. Gloves. Moving with efficiency that spoke of training rather than desperation. Professional. Purposeful. The kind of men who get hired for specific jobs and execute them without improvisation. The first one grabbed my arms from behind before I could turn fully. Strong hands pinning my elbows. The second one stepped in front. I saw his fist coming, had just enough time to register the trajectory before it connected with my ribs. The pain was extraordinary. Sharp. Total. Like every nerve in my torso firing simultaneously. I tried to shout. The second blow landed before I could draw breath. Same side. Same ribs. Precise. This wasn't random violence. This was a message being delivered to a specific address. I fought. 64 years old, but still carrying muscle memory from decades of physical fitness requirements. Twisted. Tried to break the grip behind me. Got one arm free and swung. Connected with something. Heard a grunt, then a third blow. This one to my kidney. Everything went white. My knees buckled. The concrete came up to meet my face with a crack that I heard more than felt. Then pain. Then nothing. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. A paramedic's penlight. Questions I couldn't process. Officer voices crackling through radios. The taste of blood and concrete dust. 3 fractured ribs. Mild concussion. Bruised kidney. Lucky it wasn't worse. That's what the emergency room doctor told me at Northwestern Memorial at 11:40 that night. I didn't feel lucky. But it was the note they found tucked under my windshield wiper that confirmed what I already knew. 5 words in neat block letters on white paper. Some cases should stay closed. Not a mugging. Not random. A warning. Delivered with surgical precision by people who knew exactly where I'd be and when I'd be there. People who'd been watching. People hired by someone who wanted me to understand that my investigation had been noticed. I was still in the hospital bed Tuesday morning. Ribs wrapped, pain medication barely touching the sharp ache in my side, when Ray arrived. His face wore an expression I'd seen only during the worst cases, the ones where the answer made you wish you'd never asked the question. He sat in the chair beside my bed, opened his laptop, didn't ask how I was feeling. Knew the answer wouldn't be honest anyway. I found her, he said, the screen filled with a photograph. A young woman. Early 20s. Dark eyes, holding something fierce and unbroken. A face I'd never consciously seen before but recognized in the way you recognize a melody you heard once in a dream. Keisha Marie Dawson. Born 1992. Chicago South Side. Father. Officer. Terrence Dawson. Chicago Police Department. 14th District. My chest tightened beneath the bandages. Not from the ribs. Terrence Dawson. The name rose from 14 years of buried memory, like a body surfacing from deep water. I knew that name. Knew it the way you know the names of people whose lives you've changed irreversibly. The ones who haunt the margins of your career, whether you acknowledge them or not. 2011. Ray continued. You investigated Officer Terrence Dawson for accepting bribes from drug dealers operating in the 14th District. Cash payments totaling $15,000. Evidence found in his station locker. Serial numbers matching bills from a DEA seizure 3 weeks prior. You presented findings to the disciplinary board. Terrence was terminated. Lost his pension. All benefits revoked. I remembered. Not every detail, but enough. Terrence Dawson, sitting across from me in the Internal Affairs basement office. A black man in his 40s. 14 years on the force. Good record until the evidence appeared. Hands gripping the table. Eyes burning with something I'd classified as guilt, but might have been something else entirely. He kept saying something, I murmured. During the interview, he kept repeating something. Ray nodded. I pulled the transcript. He said, check Garza's locker. Over and over. Check Garza's locker. You noted it as deflection. Lieutenant Victor Garza. The name surfaced with Terrence's. Garza had been the one who reported the suspicious behavior. Filed the initial complaint that triggered my investigation. What happened to Terrence after termination? I asked, though something in my gut already knew. Ray's voice went quiet. Lost his house within a year. Couldn't find work. No department hires a cop fired for corruption. His wife had died of cancer. In 2009, he was raising 2 kids alone. Keisha, 19 at the time of termination, and Darnell, 14. Ray paused. The kind of pause that means the next words will hurt. Terrence Dawson died in 2015. Heart attack. Age 52. The family had nothing by then. Keisha was 23. Took care of Darnell until 2017 when he was 22 years old. What happened in 2017? Darnell Dawson committed suicide. Jumped from the 47th Street overpass on the Dan Ryan Expressway. The hospital room went cold. Machines beeped, steady rhythms that mocked the chaos inside my chest. I stared at the ceiling and saw a family. A father destroyed. A daughter left alone. A son who couldn't carry the weight of what had been taken from them. She was 19 when I took her father's career. 23 when he died. 25 when her brother jumped off an overpass. And now she was 33. Married to my son. Living in my son's home. Poisoning my son's body and framing him for crimes he didn't commit. All to make me feel exactly what she felt. 15 years, I said. Ray nodded. She built a new identity in 2019. Keisha Dawson became Vanessa Pierce. Met Marcus at a networking event in 2020. Married him 2021. 6 years of marriage. 6 years of waiting for exactly the right moment. I closed my eyes. Behind them I saw Terrence Dawson's face in that basement office. The way he'd gripped the table. The words I'd dismissed as a guilty man's desperate deflection. Check Garza's locker. Check Garza's locker. What if I'd listened? James. Ray's voice pulled me back. There's something else. I pulled the original Dawson file from 2011. Something about the evidence doesn't sit right. The serial numbers on those bills. The way they connected to Garza's seizure 3 weeks prior. I think we need to look deeper. My broken ribs screamed as a new kind of pain settled into my chest. The kind that no medication could touch. You think Terrence was innocent? I think we need to find out. Because if he was, then Keisha didn't just target the wrong man for the wrong reasons. She targeted the right man for the right reasons. And that changes everything. There are 2 kinds of mistakes in life. The kind you can fix with an apology and a change of course. And the kind that kill people before you realize you were wrong. I spent Thursday night at my kitchen table. Discharged against medical advice that morning. Ribs wrapped so tight every breath felt like a negotiation with my own body. Pain medication untouched on the counter. Because I needed clarity more than comfort. Needed my mind sharp enough to see what I'd been blind to for 14 years. The Terrence Dawson file spread across the same table where Diane and I used to plan our weekends, where Marcus used to do homework, where our family used to exist as something whole and untouched by the decisions I made in basement offices. I'd kept copies of every major case. Habit from decades of internal affairs work where records disappeared and memories were revised to suit whoever had power that particular year. The Dawson file was thin, 23 pages. 14-year career reduced to a stack of paper that fit in a single manila folder. I started at the beginning. The complaint, filed November 8, 2011. Lieutenant Victor Garza, 14th District. Reporting suspicious behavior by Officer Terrence Dawson. Excessive spending. Inconsistent with salary. Frequent association with known drug dealers on the west side. Failure to properly log evidence from narcotic seizures. I'd taken the complaint at face value back then. Garza was a lieutenant. 15 years seniority. No disciplinary history. Good evaluations. The kind of cop other cops looked up to. When a man like that files a complaint against a subordinate, you investigate. That's how the system works. Next document. My investigation notes. Dated November 14th through December 19th, 2011. 6 weeks of work that ended a man's career in a single afternoon. The evidence had been straightforward. $15,000 in cash found in Terrence Dawson's station locker. During a random inspection, ordered by, I checked the authorization form, Lieutenant Garza. Serial numbers on the bills matched a DEA seizure from a narcotics bust 3 weeks prior. A bust that Garza's unit had handled. I'd noted that 14 years ago. It was in my file, but I'd interpreted it as chain of custody. The bills came from Garza's operation, ended up in Dawson's locker. Therefore, Dawson had access through normal channels. Logical. Clean. The conclusion any reasonable investigator would reach. But sitting at my kitchen table at 2 a.m. with 3 broken ribs and the knowledge that a man's daughter had spent 15 years destroying my family, I saw it differently. Who else had access to those bills between the seizure and the locker discovery? Garza. His unit. His evidence. Lockup. His chain of custody. Who ordered the random locker inspection that found the money? Garza. Who had physical access to the locker room after hours? I pulled the building access logs from my file. Station access records showed Garza badging into the 14th District building at 2:17 a.m. on November 7th. The night before the inspection he ordered. The night before $15,000 appeared in Terrence Dawson's locker. I stared at that timestamp. 2:17 a.m. No legitimate reason for a lieutenant to be in the station at that hour. No explanation in any log or report. I'd had this information 14 years ago. It was in my file. I'd seen it, and I'd filed it as inconsequential, because the cash was in Dawson's locker, and the serial numbers matched and everything pointed in one direction with no loose threads. Too clean. The same instinct that had told me Vanessa's documents were too perfectly arranged was now screaming at me from across 14 years of silence. I turned to the interview transcript. Terrence Dawson. December 15th, 2011. The day I ended his career. My own voice in typed transcript. Officer Dawson, can you explain the presence of $15,000 in your assigned locker? Dawson's response, recorded by the stenographer with clinical neutrality. That money was planted. I never touched it. Check Garza's locker. He's the one running protection for dealers on the west side. Check Garza's locker. He's setting me up because I told the captain I suspected him. My response. The evidence indicates otherwise. Officer Dawson, check Garza's locker. Please. I'm begging you. Check his locker. I'd written 2 words in the margin of that transcript 14 years ago. Noted, deflection. I dismissed a man's desperate plea as a guilty man's last strategy. Because the evidence was clean. Because Garza was a lieutenant with a spotless record. Because the system told me where to look, and I looked exactly where it pointed without asking who was doing the pointing. I set the transcript down. My hands were shaking. Not from pain medication I hadn't taken. From the realization settling into my bones with the weight of concrete. Terrence Dawson told me the truth. 14 years ago, sitting across from me in that basement office, a man begged me to look deeper, and I chose the easy answer. The clean evidence. The convenient conclusion. I chose wrong, and because I chose wrong, A man lost his career, his pension, his ability to provide for his children, lost his home within a year, lost his will to live within 4, and his son, 22 years old with a lifetime ahead of him, stood on the 47th Street overpass and decided that a world built on that kind of injustice wasn't worth staying in. I put my head in my hands and wept. For the first time since Diane's funeral. Wept for Terrence Dawson, who tried to tell me the truth and was punished for it. For Darnell, who inherited his father's despair. For Keisha, who grew up watching her family disintegrate because one man in a basement office didn't listen. For Marcus, caught in the crossfire of a war he didn't know existed. And for myself, because the truth I'd spent 35 years claiming to serve had been right in front of me the entire time, begging to be heard. And I'd chosen to believe the system instead. Garza was still out there. Still on the force. Still, whatever he'd been in 2011. A corrupt officer who'd planted evidence on a colleague to protect his own operation, still destroying lives from inside a badge. My phone buzzed against the table. Unknown number. A text message. Dinner tomorrow. River North. Just you and me. Time we talked truth. V. I stared at the screen. Vanessa. Keisha. The girl who'd watched me destroy her father from across an interrogation table, who'd grown into a woman patient enough to spend 15 years building a revenge so elaborate it required a false identity, a marriage, and the systematic poisoning of an innocent man. She wanted to meet. Face to face. Knowing I now knew who she was, I should have called the FBI. Should have forwarded the message to Agent Carter and let the system handle it the way systems are supposed to handle things. But the system had failed Terrence Dawson. It had failed Keisha. It had failed Darnell. And it was failing Marcus right now. While the real criminal, Garza, still wore a badge and slept soundly. I typed back one word. Where? I called Ray before leaving. He answered on the second ring. You're insane, he said. She tried to frame your son and probably ordered the beating in the parking garage. And you're going to sit across a table from her. I need to hear her. Need to understand. Then I'm tracking your phone. Anything feels wrong. You leave. Immediately. Understood. The restaurant was in River North. The kind of place that serves $40 entrees under lighting designed to make everyone look beautiful and trustworthy. Jazz playing softly from hidden speakers. White tablecloths. Candles flickering in glass holders. The architecture of intimacy. A stage for conversations no one else should hear. Keisha was already seated. Corner table. View of the entrance. She wore a black dress and minimal jewelry. No more designer excess. No more performed luxury. As if, knowing her cover was blown, she'd decided to stop pretending to be someone with something to prove. She looked smaller without the performance. Younger. More human than the polished weapon I'd seen at the penthouse. James. She gestured to the chair across from her. Her voice was different too. Stripped of the honey warmth. Flat. Controlled. The voice of someone who'd been holding a mask in place for so long that removing it left nothing familiar underneath. Thank you for coming. I sat carefully. Ribs protesting the movement. Studied her the way I'd studied 1,000 suspects across 1,000 tables. But this wasn't an interrogation room. And she wasn't entirely a suspect. She was also, in ways I was only beginning to understand, a victim. I thought we should talk honestly, she said. No more pretending. The waiter appeared. She ordered for both of us without asking. Pan-seared salmon. A bottle of wine she selected with familiarity that suggested she'd been here before. Planning this. Preparing. When the food arrived, I lifted my fork. Cut a piece of the salmon. Brought it toward my mouth. The smell stopped me. Faint. Beneath the butter and herbs. A metallic quality that shouldn't exist in properly prepared food. Subtle enough that anyone who wasn't specifically looking for it would miss entirely. I set the fork down, pushed the plate 3 inches forward, lifted my wine glass, swirled it without drinking, and set that aside too. I'm not hungry, I said. Hospital food killed my appetite. Something flickered across her face. Calculation interrupted. A sequence broken. She'd expected me to eat. Needed me to eat. That's unfortunate, she said. The chef prepared yours specially. Yours. She emphasized the word just enough for me to understand. The food was dosed. The wine was dosed. She was still trying to poison me, even now, even sitting across from me in a public restaurant. Knowing I knew her name, I leaned back in my chair. Let silence stretch between us the way I used to let it stretch in interrogation rooms. Uncomfortable. Demanding. The kind of quiet that forces people to fill it with truth, because the emptiness becomes unbearable. She held the silence longer than most. 30 seconds. 45. A full minute. Then her jaw tightened. Something shifted behind her eyes. You know, she said. Not a question. I know. How long? Long enough. And then I said the word that ended 6 years of performance in a single breath. Keisha. The mask didn't just slip this time. It shattered. Like glass hitting marble. Complete. Irreversible. Every carefully constructed layer of Vanessa Whitfield collapsed in the space between one heartbeat and the next. What remained was Keisha Dawson. Raw. Unguarded. And filled with a hatred so old it had fossilized into something that looked almost like calm. So you found me, she said. Her voice carried no surprise, only exhaustion. The weariness of someone who'd been running a marathon for 15 years and finally reached the finish line. Does it matter? It's already done. Marcus is in jail. Your reputation is destroyed. Your name will always be the father who turned in his own son. Why? I asked. Though I knew. Needed to hear her say it. Her eyes went dark. Not with anger. With grief so ancient, it had calcified into something structural. Something load-bearing. You destroyed my father. Took everything from him. His badge. His pension. His dignity. His reason to keep living. You sat in that basement and told him the evidence indicated otherwise while he begged you to look deeper. And you didn't. You let him walk out of that building with nothing and watched his entire life collapse. I listened. Didn't defend myself. Didn't explain. Because she was right. Darnell, she continued. My baby brother. He was 14 when Dad lost everything. Watched our father shrink. Watched him lose the house. Watched him stop eating, stop smiling, stop being the man who used to carry us on his shoulders. Darnell was 22 when he decided he couldn't live in a world this unjust. 22 years old, standing on an overpass. Her voice cracked on the last word. First real emotion I'd seen that wasn't calculated, wasn't performed. Just grief. Naked. And bottomless. I sat with it. Didn't look away. Owed her at least that. I spent 15 years building this, she said. New identity. New person. Found your son. Made him love me. Made him trust me. And then I took everything from him, the way you took everything from us. And I made you be the one to do it. So you'd know. So you'd finally know what it feels like to destroy your own family with your own hands. Silence. The jazz played. Candles flickered. The world continued around us, unaware that two people were sitting in its wreckage. Then I said the thing she didn't expect. Your father was innocent, Keisha. She went still. Completely. Not even breathing. I reviewed the file this week. The evidence was planted. Lieutenant Victor Garza accessed the station at 2:17 a.m., the night before your father's locker was inspected. The same bills from a seizure Garza's unit handled 3 weeks prior. Your father begged me to check Garza's locker. I didn't listen. No. The word came out barely audible. You're lying. You're trying to. I'm not lying. I should have listened to him. I should have investigated Garza instead of accepting the easy answer. Your father was telling the truth, and I chose the convenient conclusion over the difficult one. And because of that choice, your father lost everything. And so did you. She stared at me, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. 15 years of certainty cracking beneath her like ice over deep water. You're lying to save yourself. Check the records. Building access logs. November 7th, 2011. Garza, 2:17 a.m. The serial numbers on those bills came from his seizure, his unit, his evidence. Lockup. Stop. Your father told me the truth, and I chose wrong. I am genuinely sorry, Keisha. For what that's worth. After everything, she pushed back from the table. Chair scraping marble. Hands shaking. Eyes wild with something between rage and collapse. This isn't over, she said. Voice breaking. This isn't. You don't get to just... She turned. Grabbed her purse. Moved toward the exit with steps that were too fast. Too unsteady. Too desperate. And I knew. Watching her disappear through the restaurant door into the river north night, she wasn't running from me. She was running toward Marcus. Whatever endgame she'd constructed, whatever final act she'd planned for the night she confronted me, my revelation had shattered the script. But it hadn't stopped the machinery. Somewhere in her 15-year plan was a final move, and a woman whose entire identity had just collapsed around her was now hurtling toward my son with nothing left to lose. I pulled my phone. Called Ray. She's running. Heading back toward Marcus. We need to move. Now. Ray and I spent the weekend trying to reach Marcus through every legal channel available. Calls to his public defender. Messages left with the FBI case agent. Requests for emergency visitation denied because my name was now flagged in the system as a potential conflict of interest. Monday morning brought the bail hearing. Federal courtroom. Judge David Chen presiding. I sat in the back row wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap, like a man hiding from his own life. Malcolm had warned me not to let Marcus see me. You're a trigger, he'd said. Let the system work. So I watched the system work from 20 rows back. Marcus stood at the defense table in his orange jumpsuit. Thinner than last week. Hands cuffed in front. His public defender, a young woman named Sarah Cho who looked barely 30. Argued competently, but without the fire that comes from knowing someone is innocent. The prosecution presented their case with confidence. Flight risk. Offshore accounts. Sophisticated fraud scheme. The evidence, from their perspective, was damning. Then Judge Chen set bail at $750,000. I was calculating how quickly I could liquidate my retirement accounts when Vanessa stood. Your Honor. Her voice carried across the courtroom with perfect composure. The devastated wife, who still believed in her husband. I can arrange immediate payment. She produced a cashier's check. I recognized the bank. Joint account. Money she'd stolen, through the very fraud she'd constructed, now being used to free the man she'd framed. The elegance of it was almost admirable if you could forget that a human being was being destroyed inside it. Marcus was released within the hour. I waited outside. Positioned myself near the courthouse steps where he'd have to pass. He saw me before I could speak, and the look on his face stopped me like a wall. Not confusion anymore. Not the foggy bewilderment of a man being chemically controlled. This was anger. Clear. Focused. Burning. What are you doing here? His voice carried across the marble steps loud enough for other people to turn and look. Marcus, please. I need to talk to you. About Vanessa. About who? She really. He closed the distance between us in 3 steps. Close enough that I could see the veins in his temples. Close enough that a courthouse security guard shifted forward. You put me in jail. His voice shook. Not with weakness. With fury. My own father called the FBI on me. I spent 2 weeks in a cell because of you. And she was the one who got me out. She showed up every day. She posted my bail. She believed in me when you didn't. I tried to tell you. She's been— Stop. The word hit like a slap. Just stop. I'm done listening to you. Whatever conspiracy theory you've built in your head to justify what you did to me, I don't want to hear it. You're obsessed. You can't accept that I chose someone you don't control. Behind him, Vanessa appeared at the courthouse doors, walking toward us with measured steps. Her expression was concern, worry, the perfect wife rushing to protect her traumatized husband from his unstable father. But for just a moment, as Marcus turned away from me toward her, her eyes met mine over his shoulder. And what I saw there wasn't the shattered woman from the restaurant. It was cold recalculation. She'd recovered, rebuilt the mask, found new resolve. Marcus. Her hand found his arm. Gentle, possessive. Let's go home. You need rest. He let her guide him down the steps toward a black car I didn't recognize, didn't look back, didn't pause. Just walked away from me and toward the woman who was slowly killing him. Marcus, I called out. Last attempt. Desperate. Don't eat anything she gives you. Please. Security moved toward me. Sir, you need to step back. I stepped back. Watched the car pull away. Watched my son disappear behind tinted glass with his poisoner's hand on his shoulder, and no idea that the woman beside him had spent 15 years engineering his destruction. The restraining order arrived Tuesday morning, delivered by a process server who knocked at 7:15 while I was staring at cold coffee. 500 feet. No contact. No phone calls. No messages through third parties. Violation meant immediate arrest. Vanessa had filed it Monday afternoon, citing harassment, stalking behavior, delusional accusations against his daughter-in-law. The filing included statements from Marcus, supporting the order. Statements my son signed while still under the influence of lithium and the emotional manipulation of a woman who'd spent 6 years learning exactly how to make him do what she wanted. One piece of paper. One signature from a judge. And every legal pathway to my son was sealed shut. I sat at my kitchen table. The same table where this entire nightmare began with a phone call 3 weeks ago. Rain streaked down the windows. Chicago October had fully surrendered to November gray. The city looked like how I felt. Cold. Empty. Stripped of everything that used to make it bearable. I couldn't call Marcus. Couldn't text. Couldn't drive past his building. Couldn't send Ray or anyone else to check on him. 500 feet might as well have been 500 miles. And every hour that restraining order stayed in place was another hour Vanessa had unrestricted access to a man she was poisoning. How long before she increased the dose? How long before an accident that wasn't an accident? How long before the lithium levels in my son's blood crossed from debilitating into fatal? I called Ray at 9 that night. His voice told me he'd been expecting the call. The restraining order, I said. I heard. He paused. James, we need to move faster. If we can prove Garza framed Terrence, we prove Keisha's motive. If we prove motive, we can get the FBI to act on the poisoning evidence. Unravel the whole thing from the foundation up. How? The IA files are 14 years old. Garza's still on the force. He's made captain now. He has connections. Paula Hendricks. The name landed like a key turning in a lock I'd forgotten existed. Ray continued. Remember her? Sergeant under you in IA. Retired to Springfield in 2016. She kept copies of everything, James. She told me once, years ago, that she never trusted Garza. Said something about the Dawson case always bothering her, but being told to drop it by her supervisor. Springfield. 200 miles south on I-55. 3 hours if you pushed it. She'll talk? I asked. Already called her. She's been waiting 14 years for someone to ask the right questions. She has original evidence logs, access records, Notes she kept privately because she knew something was wrong but couldn't prove it alone. A spark of something ignited in my chest. Not hope, exactly. Something harder, more desperate. The recognition that there might be one path left through the maze Vanessa had built around me. When? Tomorrow. 4 a.m. departure. I'll drive. I hung up. Stood at my window watching Chicago disappear into night. Somewhere out there, 42 floors up in a Gold Coast penthouse, my son was drinking tea prepared by a woman who wanted him dead or damaged beyond repair. And I was 3 hours away from the one person who might have proof that could save him. 3 hours to Springfield. The evidence that could break Garza. The truth that could free Marcus. And maybe, just maybe, the justice that Terrence Dawson had begged me for 14 years ago, from across an interrogation table. This time I would listen. 4 a.m. Interstate 55 South. November darkness. Swallowing the highway, in both directions. Ray drove. I sat in the passenger seat with the Dawson file on my lap, reading pages I'd already memorized by the glow of passing headlights. Neither of us spoke for the first hour. The engine hummed. Cornfields stretched invisible on either side of the road. Illinois at 4 in the morning is nothing but flatness and silence and the occasional glow of a distant farmhouse. I kept returning to the interview transcript. Page 14. The moment I ended Terrence Dawson's life without killing him. Officer Dawson, the evidence clearly indicates you received payments from narcotics dealers operating in your district. And his response. The one I'd dismissed. The one that had haunted me since Thursday night. I never took a dime. 14 years I served this city. 14 years clean. Check Garza's locker. I told Captain Morrison 3 weeks ago that Garza was running protection. 3 weeks later, money shows up in my locker? You think that's coincidence? I'd written deflection in the margin. Case closed. Career ended. Family destroyed. You're going to wear a hole in that paper, Ray said without taking his eyes off the road. He told me. 14 years ago, he sat across from me and told me exactly what happened. And I chose to believe the evidence instead of the man. You followed procedure, James. The evidence supported the conclusion. Procedure destroyed an innocent family. Ray was quiet for a mile. 2 miles. Then, that's why we're driving to Springfield at 4 in the morning. To fix what procedure got wrong. Dawn broke somewhere south of Bloomington. Pink and gold spreading across flat horizon like watercolor on wet paper. I thought about Terrence watching his last sunrise as a police officer, walking out of that building with nothing but his keys and whatever dignity he could salvage. Going home to tell his children that their father wasn't a cop anymore, that the world they'd built their lives around had been pulled out from under them. Keisha would have been 19. Old enough to understand. Old enough to see her father crumble. Old enough to decide that whoever was responsible would pay. She'd been right about that. She'd just been wrong about the method. Springfield appeared at 7:15. Gray sky. State Capitol architecture. The kind of mid-sized city that exists primarily as a reminder that Illinois extends far beyond Chicago's gravity. Paula Hendricks lived in a quiet neighborhood on the east side. Ranch house. Tidy lawn despite November. American flag on the porch. The home of someone who'd served and retired with her principles intact even when the system hadn't deserved them. She opened the door before we knocked. 58 years old. Silver-streaked hair pulled back. Sharp eyes that assessed us both in under 2 seconds. She'd been a good investigator. Maybe better than me if the system had given her room to prove it. James Whitfield. She stepped aside to let us in. Her voice carried no warmth but no hostility either. Just the measured neutrality of a woman who'd been waiting 14 years for this conversation. I wondered how long it would take you to come asking. The living room was neat. Organized. But one wall was dedicated to filing cabinets. 5 of them. Metal. Locked. The kind of archive that spoke of someone who'd never trusted institutional record-keeping to preserve truth. You kept everything, I said. Everything that mattered. She pulled a key from her pocket and unlocked the third cabinet. Pulled a folder marked D2011 inches precise handwriting. I knew someday someone would need to see this. Figured it might as well be preserved properly. She laid the folder on her kitchen table. Inside, documents I'd never seen. Documents that should have been in the official file, but weren't. Building access log. November 7th, 2011. She pointed. Lieutenant Victor Garza. Badge entry at 2:17 a.m. Exit at 2:41 a.m. 24 minutes in the station in the middle of the night. No shift assignment. No legitimate reason. I saw this log, I said. It was in my file. I noted it but dismissed it. You dismissed it because Garza was a lieutenant with connections. And because the evidence in Dawson's locker seemed conclusive. She pulled another page. But look at this. Evidence chain of custody for the October 15th narcotics seizure. Garza's unit. The bills that ended up in Dawson's locker came from this seizure. Garza personally signed them into evidence lockup. And here, she pointed to a signature line. A checkout log showing the evidence had been accessed on November 6th. The night before, Garza entered the building at 2:17. The same bills checked out of lockup and never logged back in. He took the money from his own evidence seizure. Ray said quietly. Planted it in Dawson's locker that night. Then ordered the inspection the next morning to discover it. Hendricks nodded. I reported this to my supervisor, Lieutenant Commander Frank DiMaggio. 2 days later, DiMaggio told me the case was closed and I should focus on other assignments. 3 months later, Garza received a commendation and promotion to captain. You were told to bury it, I said. I was told my career would end if I pushed further. She met my eyes with an expression I recognized. The quiet fury of someone who'd been forced to choose between truth and survival. I chose survival. I'm not proud of that. But I kept the evidence because I knew someday the truth would need to surface. I stared at the documents spread across Paula Hendricks's kitchen table. Proof. Clear. Undeniable. 14 years late, but finally in the hands of someone who would use it. Terrence Dawson was innocent. I said aloud. For the record. For Paula. For the ghost of a man I'd wronged without knowing. Hendricks nodded. He was a good cop. One of the best I'd ever worked with. And the system chewed him up because one corrupt lieutenant needed a scapegoat. I opened my mouth to ask about next steps. About getting this to the FBI. About how quickly we could move to clear Terrence's name and expose Garza and unravel the entire chain that had led from that basement office in 2011 to my son in a Gold Coast penthouse being poisoned by a woman with every right to hate me. My phone rang. The sound cut through Hendricks's quiet kitchen like a blade. Unknown number. My hand trembled as I answered. Dad. Marcus's voice. But wrong. Weak. Slurred worse than I'd heard it in the jail. Each word costing effort that a 35-year-old man shouldn't need to expend. Marcus. What's wrong? Can't breathe. She. His voice broke into a cough. Wet. Terrible. Pills. Found pills. Took. She made me. Dad. Help. Then crashing. Something heavy hitting a floor. Glass breaking. And in the background, distant but clear enough to freeze every drop of blood in my veins, Vanessa's voice. You weren't supposed to call anyone. More sounds. Struggle. A thud. Then nothing. The line went dead. I stood in Paula Hendricks's kitchen, 200 miles from Chicago, holding a phone that had gone silent and evidence that could save everything, and realized with horrible clarity that none of it mattered if my son was dead before I got home. One phone call. In 35 years of law enforcement, I'd made thousands of calls. Routine. Procedural. Methodical. Each one, a single thread in the vast fabric of institutional justice. This call was different. This call had to do everything. At once. I dialed FBI Special Agent Denise Carter. Chicago Field Office. The number Ray had secured 3 days ago through his federal contacts. A direct line to the agent now assigned to Marcus's case. She answered on the second ring. Carter. Agent Carter. This is James Whitfield, former head of Internal Affairs, Chicago PD. My son Marcus Whitfield just called me in medical distress. His wife, Vanessa Whitfield, real name Keisha Dawson, is attempting to kill him. 482 North State Street, Penthouse East, Gold Coast Building. He needs paramedics, immediately. Slow down, Mr. Whitfield. How do you? I didn't slow down. I couldn't. Every second was a second Marcus might not have. Listen to me carefully, because I'm only going to say this once and my son may be dying while I talk. Vanessa Whitfield is a false identity. Her real name is Keisha Marie Dawson, born 1992, Chicago. Her father was Officer Terrence Dawson, terminated from CPD in 2011. She created the Vanessa Whitfield identity in 2019. She married my son to destroy me as revenge for her father. She has been poisoning Marcus with lithium for over a year. She forged his signatures on the embezzlement documents. The fraud was hers. Marcus is innocent. And right now she is in that penthouse with a man she just force-fed an overdose of pills. Silence on the line. 2 seconds. 3. I could hear Carter processing, evaluating, deciding whether I was a credible source or a desperate father spinning conspiracy theories. I have evidence, I continued. Forensic handwriting analysis, proving the signatures are forgeries. Toxicology reports showing lithium poisoning. And I'm currently in Springfield, Illinois, with a retired IA sergeant who has documented proof that Keisha's father was framed by Lieutenant Victor Garza in 2011, which establishes motive for a 15-year revenge operation. More silence. Then keyboard sounds. Fast. I'm dispatching paramedics and a tactical team to North State now, Carter said. Her voice had shifted from skepticism to operational. Give me everything else. I gave her everything. Hendrix's evidence. The building access logs. Garza's name. The evidence checkout records. Dr. Park's handwriting analysis. The toxicology results. 14 years of corruption and 15 years of revenge compressed into 3 minutes of urgent information while Ray was already moving. He'd grabbed the car keys during my first sentence. By the time I finished with Carter, he had the engine running. I climbed in. Phone still pressed to my ear. Ribs screaming. Hendrix stood in her doorway watching us pull away, her hand raised in something between a wave and a salute. I'm sending digital copies of Hendrix's evidence to your secure email now, I told Carter. From Ray's phone. Along with Dr. Park's analysis and the toxicology report. Received, Carter said. 3 minutes later. Units are en route to North State. ETA 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Marcus had been silent for at least 10 already. How long does lithium overdose take to become fatal? I didn't know. Couldn't think clearly enough to calculate. Just sat in the passenger seat watching Illinois farmland blur past at speeds that would have gotten us arrested if anyone had been watching. Ray drove like a man possessed. 100 miles per hour on I-55 North. Then 110. The car shaking slightly at speeds it wasn't designed to maintain. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say that would make the distance shorter or the minutes pass faster. Carter called back 18 minutes later. The longest 18 minutes of my life. Mr. Whitfield. Marcus has been located. Paramedics are on scene. Is he alive? He's alive. Unconscious. Suspected sedative overdose combined with lithium toxicity. They're stabilizing him for transport to Northwestern Memorial. The air left my lungs in a sound I didn't recognize. Relief so profound, it felt like pain. Ray's hand found my shoulder, squeezed once. And Vanessa? I managed. No sign of her in the penthouse. Evidence of a rushed exit. Drawers open. Closet partially cleared. Her vehicle, a black BMW 5 Series, is not in the building garage. APB has been issued. We're checking traffic cameras now. She's running, I said. We'll find her. I know where she's going. Carter paused. Waiting. Oak Hill Cemetery. South Side. Her father is buried there. Terrence Dawson. It's the last place that meant anything to her. The last connection she has to who she really is. How can you be sure? Because I spent 35 years understanding what drives people. Keisha Dawson just had her entire identity collapse. 15 years of planning, revealed as based on a lie. The one person she did all of this for is dead and buried in that cemetery. When everything else falls away, people go back to where it started. Sending units to Oak Hill, Carter said. Her voice carried a new quality now. Respect, maybe. Or at least the recognition that I understood this case in ways her agents couldn't. Stay available. Do not approach the suspect yourself. Understood? Understood. The call ended. Ray pushed the speedometer higher. The highway unspooled beneath us, like a ribbon leading back to everything that mattered. Marcus was alive. Damaged. Poisoned. But alive. Being carried toward a hospital where doctors who understood lithium toxicity would flush the poison from his blood and begin the long process of restoration. And Keisha was running. Not toward escape. Not toward freedom. Toward the grave of a father she'd spent 15 years avenging. A father who'd been innocent. A father whose truth I'd been too blind to see until his daughter forced me to look by destroying everything I loved. The clock on Ray's dashboard read 7:42 a.m. We'd been in Springfield less than 30 minutes. The entire world had changed in the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee. 200 miles to Chicago. 2 hours at the speed Ray was driving. 2 hours until I could see my son. Until I could stand at his bedside and tell him everything. That he was innocent. That I was wrong. That the woman he married had been a ghost built from grief and rage, and a 15-year-old photograph of a cop who deserved better than what I gave him. Carter called again at 8:15. Illinois state line. BMW located via traffic camera. Heading south on I-94. Toward the Dan Ryan. Consistent with Oak Hill Cemetery route. Tactical team positioning now. SWAT on standby. I closed my eyes. Pictured Keisha driving south through the city where she'd grown up. Past the neighborhoods where Terrence had walked his beat for 14 years. Past the overpass where Darnell had stood for the last time. Toward the cemetery where her father lay in ground that should never have received him so early. She wasn't running from justice. She was running toward the only person who'd ever loved her without conditions. And when we find her, I said quietly, more to myself than to Carter or Ray, she needs to know the truth. About her father. About Garza. She needs to know that Terrence was innocent and that his name will be cleared. That's not your call to make, Mr. Whitfield. No, I said. But it's the right thing to do. Ray glanced at me. Said nothing. Pushed the car faster. Chicago skyline appeared on the horizon. Gray against gray. Home. Oak Hill Cemetery. 4:37 in the morning. Red and blue lights pulsing silently across headstones and bare November trees. FBI. Tactical units, flanking the east entrance. SWAT van dark and waiting. Everything staged. The black BMW sat abandoned inside the gates. Driver's door open. Engine ticking. She hadn't bothered closing it. Hadn't bothered with pretense. She'd simply walked toward the one place left that meant anything. Agent Carter met us at the perimeter. She's 200 yards in. Section 12. Kneeling at a grave. No weapons visible. I need to talk to her. I said. Absolutely not. Agent Carter. That woman has spent 15 years believing I destroyed her family. I'm the only person who can explain what really happened to her father. Carter calculated. 5 seconds. 10. 5 minutes. She produces anything that could be a weapon. You drop immediately. I walked forward. Cemetery opening around me. Headstones stretching into darkness. Grass wet. Air smelling of cold earth. And dying leaves. Section 12. Working class plots. Simple markers. And there, kneeling in wet grass before gray granite. Keisha. No coat. Black dress from the restaurant. Hair tangled. Shoulders curved inward like her body was collapsing around a wound too large to contain. The headstone. Terrence Michael Dawson. 1963 to 2015. Beloved father. Faithful servant. I stopped 10 feet behind her. I failed you, Daddy. Her whisper carried in the still air. I tried so hard. 15 years. And I still couldn't make it right. Keisha. She didn't startle. Just went still. Past surprise. Past fear. Past anything except exhaustion. When she turned, her face held nothing I expected. Not rage. Not calculation. Just emptiness. The hollow expression of someone who'd poured everything into a single purpose and watched it drain away. You found me. I moved forward until I stood beside her, looking down at the name of a man I'd wronged without knowing. Then I knelt. My ribs screamed. But this conversation needed to happen at the same level. Your father was innocent, Keisha. I have documented proof now. Lieutenant Garza accessed the station at 2:17 a.m. the night before the inspection. He checked out those same bills from his own seizure and planted them. A retired sergeant named Hendricks kept records for 14 years. She reported it and was told to bury it. Keisha shook her head. Not denial. The motion of someone whose foundation was shifting. Your father told me to check Garza. Begged me. And I chose the easy answer. The clean evidence. I chose wrong. Her hands pressed into the wet earth beside the grave. Fingers curling into grass like she was holding on to something solid while everything dissolved. 15 years. Her voice barely human. I spent 15 years hating you. Becoming someone else. Destroying Marcus. Destroying myself. All because I believed you ignored the truth on purpose. She looked at the headstone. He told me he was innocent. Every single day until he died. I believed him. But I thought you were the one who chose to look the other way. I thought making you feel what we felt would be justice. Because of what you did. I said quietly. I went back and looked again. Your father will be exonerated. His name cleared. Pension restored. Garza is being arrested. Something shifted in her face. Not forgiveness. Maybe never forgiveness. But recognition. Of complexity. Of tragedy. Too large for heroes and villains. Marcus. She whispered. Is he alive? Hospital. Lithium overdose. But alive. He's going to recover. A sound escaped her. Deeper than a sob. Something containing 6 years of living beside a man she'd been destroying. 6 years of watching him trust her and love her while she poisoned his body. I think I loved him. She said it to the headstone. Not at first. At first he was the weapon, but somewhere it became real. And I couldn't stop. Behind us, boots on wet grass. The operation closing in. Keisha Marie Dawson. Carter's voice carried across the stillness. FBI. Stand slowly. Keisha looked at me one last time. Her face, carrying something I never expected. Peace. Terrible. Exhausted peace. The kind from surrender. From finally putting down a weight, carried so long, your spine curved around it. Tell Marcus I'm sorry. Not sorry for the plan. Sorry that part of it became real. And that I ruined it anyway. She stood. Hands raised. Handcuffs materialized. Chrome. Catching the first gray light. The click was quiet. Final. They led her away. Past headstones. Past her father's grave. She didn't look back. I stayed. Kneeling in wet grass before Terrence Dawson's headstone. Broken ribs. Heart simultaneously lighter and heavier than it had ever been. I'm sorry, I said to the stone. To the man beneath. To 14 years of silence where his truth waited. I should have listened. I'm going to make it right. Dawn broke, gold and pink across the south side sky, illuminating rows of graves. People lived and died and forgotten or remembered, depending on whether someone loved them enough to keep telling their story. I would tell Terrence's. The least I could do. And the most. Ray appeared beside me. Hand on my shoulder. The solid weight of 30 years of friendship. Northwestern Memorial, he said. Marcus is awake. Asking for you. I stood. Slowly. Painfully. Looked at Terrence's headstone, one more time, faithful servant. He'd earned those words. And soon the world would know it. Let's go, I said. We walked back through the cemetery as morning light spread across Chicago. Behind us, the grave of an innocent man. Ahead, a hospital where my son waited. Between them, the wreckage of 15 years of hatred, and somewhere in all that wreckage, the first fragile threads of something that might eventually become healing. 2 trials, 2 verdicts, and a truth that refused to fit neatly into categories of right and wrong. Victor Garza's came first. February. Federal courtroom. The same building where Marcus had stood in an orange jumpsuit 2 months earlier. The same fluorescent lighting. The same institutional air. But this time the defendant's chair held a man in a captain's uniform who'd spent 14 years believing his crimes were buried too deep to ever surface. FBI forensic accountants laid out the case with surgical precision. Garza hadn't just framed Terrence Dawson. He'd been running protection for narcotics operations across the West Side for over a decade. 4 other officers had been similarly framed when they got too close to the truth. Evidence planted. Careers destroyed. Lives dismantled to protect a single corrupt lieutenant's empire. Paula Hendricks testified. Calm. Precise. 14 years of suppressed evidence finally given voice in a courtroom that had no choice but to listen. The building access logs, the evidence checkout records, the supervisor who'd buried her report. Everything laid bare under oath. Garza sat stone-faced through all of it. Defiant to the end. The posture of a man who'd spent so long corrupting the system that he'd forgotten the system could still function without him. The jury deliberated 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Corruption. Evidence tampering. Conspiracy. Obstruction. 22 years in federal prison. I felt nothing when the verdict came. No satisfaction. No relief. Just the flat recognition that justice delayed, this long barely qualifies as justice at all. Keisha's trial followed in March. Different courtroom. Different judge. Different everything. She sat at the defense table in a gray suit. Hands folded. Expression carrying the same emptiness I'd seen at her father's grave. The woman who'd executed a 7-year operation with surgical patients looked small now. Diminished. Like revenge had been the only architecture holding her upright, and without it she'd simply collapsed inward. The charges were read. Wire fraud. Identity fraud. Aggravated assault. Poisoning. Each carrying years. Each deserved by the letter of the law. But the law has room for context. And Keisha's context filled the courtroom with something heavier than evidence. Her defense attorney presented it methodically. An 8-year-old girl watching her father destroyed by a system that refused to hear the truth. A teenage girl burying that father at 52, dead from a heart broken by injustice. A 22-year-old woman standing at the edge of the Dan Ryan Expressway, watching police recover her brother's body. A lifetime of grief, channeled into the only purpose that made the pain bearable, I testified. Not for the prosecution, not for the defense. Just for the truth. I told the court what I'd told Keisha at her father's grave. That Terrence was innocent. That I'd failed him. That the system I represented had created the very monster it was now punishing. Judge Patricia Hammond looked at Keisha when she delivered the sentence. Her expression carried something I rarely saw from the bench. Not sympathy exactly. Acknowledgement. Miss Dawson. Grief does not justify cruelty. You poisoned an innocent man, destroyed his career, nearly killed him. These are actions that demand accountability, but this court acknowledges that the system which should have protected your family instead destroyed it. And that failure contributed directly to the path that brought you here. 15 years. Reduced from the 25 the prosecution requested. With the possibility of parole after 10, Keisha showed no reaction. Whatever fire had fueled her for 15 years had burned itself out in a cemetery at dawn. 1 week later, the exoneration. Terrence Michael Dawson, posthumously cleared of all charges. Pension restored to his estate. Official record amended to reflect 14 years of honorable service. A ceremony at CPD headquarters that I attended in the back row, watching a photograph of a man I'd wronged, received the recognition I should have given him when he was alive to hear it. I gave a press conference that afternoon. Stood before cameras and microphones on the same courthouse steps where I'd built my reputation 35 years ago. The same steps where reporters once praised my conviction rate and celebrated my dedication to justice. I was wrong. My voice carried across the gathered press without wavering. I'd practiced these words 1,000 times. They still cost everything to say aloud. In 2011, I investigated Officer Terrence Dawson based on evidence that was planted by a corrupt superior. Officer Dawson told me the truth. He begged me to look deeper, and I chose the convenient conclusion over the difficult one. That choice destroyed an innocent family. Terrence Dawson deserved better from me, and from the system I represented. His children deserved better, and I will spend whatever time I have left trying to repair what my failure helped break. Questions erupted. I answered them all, honestly, without deflection, without the polished evasion I'd perfected over decades of public life. That evening, I signed the paperwork establishing the Terrence and Darnell Dawson Memorial Scholarship Fund for children of incarcerated parents, for young people whose lives had been shattered by a system that sometimes forgets the families left behind when it closes a cell door. Funded initially from my pension savings. Open to public donation. It wasn't enough. Would never be enough. But it was a beginning. Marcus's recovery unfolded slowly across those same months. January in the hospital. Detox. His body fighting against 18 months of lithium accumulation. Tremors that took weeks to subside. Memory gaps that closed gradually, like fog lifting from a landscape in stages. February brought physical therapy, cognitive exercises, the slow rebuilding of neural pathways damaged by sustained chemical assault. Doctors cautiously optimistic. Full recovery expected. No permanent damage. Lucky, they said. Another month at those levels, and the outcome would have been different. March. He moved into an apartment 6 blocks from my building. Small. Simple. His choice. Said he needed to rebuild from the ground up. Couldn't live surrounded by luxury that reminded him of everything Keisha had constructed. We had dinner twice that month. Awkward. Careful. Like two people learning to walk together after years of moving in opposite directions. But present. Real. No performance. No masks. April. Divorce finalized. Signed by Keisha from federal custody. Uncontested. Whatever had been real in their marriage, she let go of it completely. 1 signature and 6 years dissolved into legal paperwork. In May, I visited Keisha. First time since the arrest. Federal Correctional Facility. Glass partition. Phone receivers. The architecture of accountability. She looked different. Smaller without the armor of purpose, but also somehow more present, more real. Like removing the false identity had finally allowed whatever remained underneath to simply exist without pretense. "Why are you here?" she asked. "Because hating you would make me exactly what you believed I was. And because I owed your father better than indifference toward his daughter." She was quiet, studying me through the glass the way she used to study me across dinner tables, but without the calculation, without the hunger for weakness. Tell Marcus I'm sorry. Her voice cracked slightly. Really sorry. Not for the plan. For him. He deserved better than being someone's weapon. I will. And James. She pressed her hand against the glass. My father. Is his name really clear? It's clear. His pension was restored. There's a scholarship in his name and Darnell's. For kids like you and your brother. Kids the system forgot. Tears. Silent. Streaming down a face I'd once seen as nothing but cold calculation. She wiped them with her sleeve. Prison. Issue. Gray. Thank you. For listening. Even if it took 15 years. I pressed my hand against the glass opposite hers. Two people separated by everything that had happened between them. Connected by the one thing that remained. The truth. Complicated. Painful. But finally spoken aloud. 6 months later. A Sunday morning in June. Sunlight pouring through the windows of Roosevelt's diner with the kind of warmth that makes you believe Chicago summers exist specifically to forgive its winters. Marcus sat across from me in the booth that used to belong to Ray and me. Coffee between us. No agenda. No investigation. No urgency. Just a father and son sharing space the way we should have been sharing it for the past 3 years, instead of letting silence and pride and a poisoned woman fill the distance between us. He looked like my son again. Weight restored. Eyes clear. Hands steady around his coffee mug. The tremors were gone. The fog lifted. Doctors confirmed full cognitive recovery in April. No lasting damage. A miracle, they called it. I called it grace. Therapist says I might have some memory gaps permanently, Marcus said. Things from the last year with her that I'll never fully recover. She says that's normal, with prolonged chemical exposure. How do you feel about that? He considered the question. Took a sip of coffee. Set it down with the careful precision of a man who'd spent months relearning trust in his own hands. Relieved mostly. Whatever I can't remember from those years, I don't think I want back. The parts I do remember are bad enough. We sat with that. The diner hummed around us. Dimitri refilling cups. The Sunday morning regulars reading papers and arguing about the Cubs. Normal life flowing past like a river that doesn't know or care about the storms upstream. Do you visit her? Marcus asked. His voice carried no accusation. Just curiosity. Once a month. He nodded slowly. Maybe someday I will too. Not yet. But maybe. There's no timeline on that, I said. You heal however you need to. Marcus smiled. Small but real. The first smile that reached his eyes in a way I recognized from before all of this. From before Keisha. Before the distance. Before Diane left us alone with our pride and our silence. Mom would know what to say right now, he said. She always did. She'd probably tell us we're both being too serious, that we should order pancakes and talk about something stupid for once. I laughed. The sound surprised me. How long since I'd laughed? Months. Maybe longer. Dimitri. I raised my hand. 2 orders of pancakes. Marcus grinned. There he is. There's my dad. After breakfast, we drove to Graceland Cemetery. North Side. Where Diane rested beneath an oak tree she would have loved. We stood together before her headstone, the way we hadn't since her funeral. Side by side. Shoulders almost touching. Diane Marie Whitfield. 1962 to 2021. Beloved wife. Beloved mother. The light that made us better. I miss her every day, Marcus said quietly. Me too. She worried about us. At the end. About the distance. I know. She made me promise to fix it. Marcus looked at me. Took a long breath. I think she'd say we kept that promise. Eventually. The hard way. But we kept it. I nodded. Couldn't speak for a moment. The June breeze moved through the oak above us. Warm. Gentle. the kind of wind that carries nothing heavier than pollen and sunlight. Marcus put his hand on my shoulder. No flinch, no fear, no hesitation. Just his hand. Solid. Present. The weight of a son choosing to stand beside his father after everything that had tried to tear them apart. Same time next Sunday? He asked. I'd like that. We walked back to the car together. Sunlight warm on our faces. Chicago stretching around us. In all directions. The city that had given me a career and taken my wife and broken my family and somehow, against all odds, given us back to each other. Driving home alone, windows down, June air filling the car with the smell of cut grass and lake water. I thought about everything this past year had taught me. About truth and the cost of ignoring it. About hatred passed down like inheritance and the damage it does to everyone it touches. About systems that break people and the people who choose to break back instead of healing. I thought about Terrence Dawson, whose name now hung on a scholarship that would send kids to college. Kids whose parents were locked away. Kids the system forgot. I thought about Darnell, 22 years old, standing on an overpass because the world felt too unjust to inhabit. I thought about Keisha, brilliant and broken, spending the best years of her life constructing a monument to grief instead of building something new. And I thought about God. How his timing never matches ours. How I'd spent 35 years believing my judgment was sufficient. My analysis complete. My conclusions correct. And it took a woman with 15 years of patience and a dead man's truth rising from the grave to teach me that certainty without humility is just arrogance wearing a badge. God reveals truth in the darkest moments. Not because he enjoys the darkness, but because that's when we finally stop squinting at our own reflection long enough to see clearly. Standing in that cemetery at dawn, watching 15 years of hatred dissolve under the weight of documented evidence, I understood something I'd missed my entire career. That justice without mercy is just revenge with better paperwork. And that God's version of justice always includes room for redemption. I don't know if Keisha will find peace in that prison cell. I don't know if Marcus will ever fully trust again. I don't know if the scholarship in Terrence's name will actually change anything for the kids who receive it. But I know this. I spent 35 years as an investigator, believing that truth was something you uncover, that it hides, and you find it, and you hold it up like a trophy. This story taught me that truth is something you surrender to. It doesn't wait for your readiness. It comes when it comes. And God gives you the strength to bear it, only if you're humble enough to ask. If I could go back, here's what I'd tell my younger self. Don't let procedure replace listening. Don't let evidence replace empathy. And never, ever let 7 months of silence with your child go unexamined. That gap between Marcus and me was the crack Keisha walked through. A crack made of pride and stubbornness, and the arrogant belief that being right mattered more than being present. To every parent listening, call your children. Today. Not tomorrow. Not when it's convenient. Today. Because silence doesn't protect anyone. It just gives space for something darker to grow. To every son and daughter. Talk to your parents before resentment builds walls too high to climb. Before someone else fills the gap you left open. And to anyone carrying hatred like a torch, remember, Keisha Dawson, 15 years of planning, 6 years of execution, and at the end, kneeling in wet grass at her father's grave with nothing but emptiness and a prison sentence. Revenge consumed everything she had, and gave her nothing in return, except a cell smaller than the one grief had already built around her heart. Some truths take time. Some justice comes late. But God's grace is sufficient for both, if we're brave enough to accept it. If this story touched something in you, I'd be grateful if you'd share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever carried something for years that turned out to be built on a misunderstanding? How did you find your way back to truth? I read every single comment, and your stories matter more than you know. Subscribe to this channel for more stories like this one. And share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Someone carrying weight they don't have to carry alone. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. It means more than I can say.